Why, the first thing Nolan Pierce noticed was the little red shoe floating in the river. For one frozen second, his heart stopped. The afternoon sunlight shimmered across the rushing water, turning the river into liquid gold, but all Nolan could see was that tiny shoe spinning helplessly in the current near the bridge. Then came the scream. A woman's desperate cry echoed through the park, sharp enough to cut through the laughter of children and the sound of passing traffic. Before anyone else could react, Nolan dropped the grocery bags from his hands and ran. The river was stronger than it looked. Cold water slammed against his chest as he dove in without thinking, fighting the current with every ounce of strength left in his exhausted body. He had spent years surviving life alone after losing his wife, but nothing had prepared him for the terror in that woman's eyes as she struggled beneath the water. Her fingers disappeared once. Then twice. Nolan reached her just before she vanished again. He grabbed her arm and pulled with everything he had while people gathered along the riverbank in horror. If you believe kindness and second chances still exist in this world, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Unlimited. Stories like this remind us that even strangers can change someone's life forever. By the time Nolan dragged the woman onto the grass, both of them were gasping for air. The woman trembled violently, coughing river water as tears streamed down her face. A little girl no older than 5 threw herself into the woman's arms crying uncontrollably. Nolan sat there soaked and shaking while paramedics rushed toward them. The woman looked at him only once before being taken away, but there was something unforgettable in her expression. It wasn't just gratitude. It looked like someone who had already lost everything and suddenly realized they had been given one more chance to live. Nolan returned home late that evening to the tiny house he rented on the edge of town. The smell of instant noodles filled the kitchen while his 8-year-old son Micah worked quietly on homework at the table. Life had not been kind to Nolan these past few years. After his wife passed away from a sudden illness, bills piled up faster than he could earn money repairing heating systems around the city. Some nights he skipped meals so Micah could eat properly. Other nights he sat awake wondering how much longer he could hold their broken little world together. Still, Nolan never complained. Every morning he packed Micah's school lunch with a handwritten joke inside the bag because he couldn't afford fancy snacks. Every night he read stories until his son fell asleep. The grief never disappeared, but Nolan learned how to carry it quietly. Days passed after the river rescue, and life returned to normal. Nolan assumed he would never see the woman again. People survived tragedies and moved on. That was how life worked. Then came the knock at the door. Rain poured heavily outside that afternoon. Nolan had just returned home from another long day of work when he heard 3 soft knocks echo through the hallway. He opened the door carefully, expecting a delivery driver or neighbor. Instead, the woman from the river stood there drenched from the storm. But she wasn't alone. The little girl clung tightly to her hand, and beside them sat 2 worn-out suitcases covered in rainwater. The woman's face looked pale and exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. Dark bruises hid beneath her sleeves. Her eyes filled with tears before she even spoke. Nolan felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. Something terrible had happened. Her name was Serafina Vale, and the little girl was her daughter Ivy. Over the next hour, the painful truth slowly unfolded inside Nolan's tiny living room while thunder shook the windows outside. Serafina had escaped an abusive relationship months earlier, but the man had tracked her down again. The day Nolan saved her from drowning was not an accident. She had fallen into the river while trying to protect Ivy during a terrifying confrontation near the bridge. Since then, she had nowhere safe left to go. The shelter she stayed at was full, and every person she trusted had turned away out of fear. But there was one thing she couldn't stop thinking about. The stranger who jumped into a river for someone he didn't even know. She told Nolan she remembered the way he looked at Ivy first before checking himself for injuries. She remembered how gently he spoke to her while she cried on the riverbank. In a world filled with selfishness and cruelty, that moment felt impossible to forget. So with nowhere else to turn, she found his address through the police report and came to the only person who had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. Nolan looked around his tiny house. The roof leaked during storms. The couch sagged in the middle. He barely had enough money for himself and Micah. But when he saw Ivy silently hugging her soaked stuffed rabbit beside the door, something inside him broke. He told them they could stay. The weeks that followed slowly transformed the house in ways Nolan never expected. For the first time in years, laughter returned to those walls. Ivy and Micah colored pictures together across the kitchen floor while Serafina helped repair old curtains and cook meals from whatever ingredients they could afford. Some nights the power flickered off, and the four of them sat together under candlelight telling stories to pass the time. But healing was not easy. Serafina carried invisible scars that surfaced in quiet moments. Sudden noises made her flinch. She apologized constantly for taking up space. Nolan understood more than she realized because grief had taught him the same habit long ago. Slowly, without realizing it, they began helping each other survive. One morning Nolan woke before sunrise and found Serafina sitting alone on the porch watching the daylight appear over the neighborhood. For a long moment neither of them spoke. They simply listened to birds singing in the distance while the world slowly turned gold around them. That was the moment Nolan realized something terrifying. The emptiness inside him was finally disappearing. Months later, Nolan received unexpected news. One of his longtime customers recommended him for a full-time maintenance position at a large company downtown. The pay was steady. Benefits included healthcare and enough income to finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. Nolan stood speechless in the kitchen holding the job offer while Micah and Ivy danced around the room celebrating. For the first time since losing his wife, the future no longer looked frightening. And Serafina? She started rebuilding her life too. She found work at a local bookstore and began smiling without forcing it. The bruises faded. The fear slowly loosened its grip. Sometimes Nolan caught her laughing freely with the children in the backyard, and it felt like witnessing sunlight after years of endless rain. Near the end of autumn, Nolan returned to the river bridge alone. The water flowed calmly beneath the evening sky, nothing like the violent current from months earlier. He stood there quietly realizing how one single moment of kindness had completely changed 4 lives forever. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, and share this video with someone who still believes humanity can heal through compassion. Your support helps Kindness Unlimited continue sharing emotional stories that inspire people around the world. And before this story ends, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a stranger's kindness that changed your life forever? As the first winter snow began falling softly around the bridge, Nolan looked toward the glowing lights of home waiting in the distance. For years he believed life had only taken things away from him. But standing there beneath the fading daylight, he finally understood something beautiful. Sometimes the people we rescue end up rescuing us too.